This is how to use Amoonguss in Pokemon VGC Regulation F. Now, I'm actually a pretty big fan of Amoonguss. I used it back in 2024 in Reg G to make top cut of the World Championships that year, and I think it's just such a strong and versatile Pokemon. So I wanted to talk a bit about some sets you can use in this format, and then also I'll talk about some of the best partners for it right now. To start off, this Citrus Berry Amoonguss set is probably going to be the most common one. Spore, Rage Powder, both very good tools for helping to shut down your opponent's team, redirect attacks, that type of thing. Protect, also very standard move on this Pokemon. The Citrus Berry helps to contribute to some really good general survivability. And then Sludge Bomb, you're going to see it a lot more in this format, mainly because it hits Rillaboom and then it hits Ogerpon, Wellspring, Hearthflame, and Teal. So it's just a really strong move to sort of do a lot of damage, and then there's that 30% chance for the poison proc, of course, so that can help out a little bit. Now, if you're wondering what to do in terms of EV spreads, I would definitely recommend going bold, and then probably going to this 244 just so you have an even number for Ruination and Superfang, and then you probably want to go up to around 212. Now, you can go a bit higher than this and hit the 236 bump if you want, but 212 I would say is the minimum, just that you have good rolls against the Adamant Shenpao Icicle Crash. And then you can dump the rest in Special Defense. Now, you'll see here I have this 27 Speed IV number on this Amoonguss. This underspeeds the Ursaluna's minimum speed Ursaluna by 1 speed point, so that you're faster than them under Trick Room. You can decide if that's important for you or not. It's very team dependent. But this is also like an option that you can have just if you're a little bit worried about that matchup. Now, I do want to talk about this Rocky Helmet option that you have. I do think this is still a strong item on Amoonguss in this format. Having that Surging Strikes deterrent is just really, really good. It's similar in a way to Ogerpon Wellspring, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later in this video. But, it just forces them to play so much differently because they really don't want to hit you with that Surging Strikes. Something to note also, if Incineroar decides to Flare Blitz you, they're going to take a lot of recoil. Same with some other contact moves. So it is a pretty good item. Definitely something you should consider using. I think it is actually a lot better than the Citrus Berry in a lot of cases right now. So definitely weigh those options. Another thing you should probably consider is that Pollen Puff is still a pretty good option. Especially if you have some bulky setup pieces or just some bulky pieces in general that you want to keep alive. Pollen Puff is just a really broken move, honestly. So, you don't have to run Sludge Bomb. Sludge Bomb is great offensively, but Pollen Puff is still a really, really strong supportive option. So if you want to run that, go ahead. Now, the last two item options I wanted to talk about on Amoonguss are Mental Herb and Covert Cloak. Mental Herb has been rising a lot in usage recently because of Taunt Fluttermane. Taunt Fluttermane's gotten a lot more popular, so stopping yourself from getting shut down by that just is quite a good option. The Covert Cloak one I think is a little bit more interesting because it has a lot less usage, but you can sort of lead it into fake out pieces and still just click Spore. So I think that's pretty cool. Clear Smog also another move option if you want, just quite good into Dondozo. But otherwise, the Amoonguss spreads as well. I think for all these, you're probably going to be running it very similar to something like this. Maybe you just want to opt for max HP instead, but you're still probably going to want bold and then around the 212 mark and then just special defense dump. And like I said before, you can do whatever you want with this speed. Now, I do want to quickly touch on some of the best partner pieces for Amoonguss. Instant Amoonguss, pretty self-explanatory. You just fake out Parting Shot, heal yourself, do whatever you want, heal up with Regenerator, switching out, all that stuff. This is quite good into like a lot of things. Ting Ludozo is the first thing that comes to mind. You're gonna just Spore all them, Parting Shot out, just slow play it, and it does quite well that way. But this duo has had a lot of usage throughout like a lot of different formats, throughout Scarlet and Violet and throughout other games. So definitely, very, very strong pairing. Urshifu Amoonguss, Urshifu Instant Amoonguss really is a quite a strong core. But Urshifu Amoonguss, you can help protect the Urshifu, especially from things like Raging Bolt. And Urshifu is just such a strong Pokemon. something that you're going to notice as well with these last three, yeah, Amoonguss is really good at helping to support some stronger Pokemon because of that redirection aspect. So you can use it beside a lot of strong offensive pieces just to get a lot of damage off. So that's why I'm saying like Amoonguss beside like Specs Fluttermane is quite good, or also Booster Special Attack. I'd be less inclined to use it beside something like Booster Speed because then you're kind of going to be a little bit passive. So something like Specs Fluttermane or Booster Special Attack Fluttermane just got a lot of damage off. You can maybe even have an opportunity to heal yourself up, but usually you're probably just going to be clicking Rage Powder and then some strong attack. And then last on here I have Waterpon Heart Flame. Obviously there are a ton of other options to pair with Amoonguss, but this is something I wanted to point out because this was used a little bit more at the start of Reg F, and I've seen a little bit less of it now, but it's still a very strong option. You have a setup Waterpon beside the redirection Amoonguss. So because you have the redirection from the Amoonguss, you don't necessarily need to use Waterpon as a redirection piece. Instead, you're using it like purely as an offensive piece. So you can run Swords Dance or you can run Focus Energy. I think Swords Dance makes a little bit more sense in this case, but you can kind of just sit beside it, and you do actually have a lot of options to heal yourself, or if you're the Sludge Bomb variant, you can do extra chip with that. But really just like a pretty strong pairing into a lot of things, and you'd be surprised how much damage, even after like a Swords Dance, even like resisted hits are going to be doing a ton of damage into everything. This Pokemon is so strong, so definitely something to consider. Now, the final thing I wanted to go over in this video is just when you should be using Waterpon Wellspring versus when you should be using Amoonguss. And I think this is kind of an important thing to go over because they do have a lot of overlapping use cases. Obviously, one is a lot more offensive and one is a lot slower and just like a bit more support oriented. They both obviously have that redirection aspect, but there is a couple of different things that you can look at to try and decide, okay, which one of these do I really want on my team? So the first thing I would say to consider is like, do I have an Urshifu Rapid Strike on my team? Because Urshifu Rapid Strike and Waterpon Wellspring do have a lot of overlap, mainly offensively, and so you don't necessarily want to have both of them on your team. I think you can, and I've seen it work before, but it's very limited cases where it does work. So if you have an Urshifu Rapid Strike, more likely Amoonguss is a better fit. And then I would say another thing that you want to think about is like, just how many offensive options do I have? Because if you're lacking offense, then you might want to opt for Waterpon Wellspring, because Amoonguss can be quite a passive piece. But if you already have a ton of offensive options on your team, then Amoonguss might be a better fit. You maybe don't need that offense, and instead you'd rather have something that can sort of sit there and shut down the opponent's team and let your other offensive pieces do the damage. That's probably a bit of an oversimplification, but hopefully you found this video helpful. And if you did, I would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Thank you. Bye.